Thank you all for being here. I just wanted to start off by saying I'm not an expert on this topic. It's something that I'm really concerned about and I'm really interested in. I hope we can have a good discussion from the ideas that come out of this. But it's not something I study or do research on. Most of my background is in production, so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today has to do with labels that reflect production methods. We're not really going to be talking about nutrition. We're mostly going to be talking about sort of more of these eco-sustainable animal welfare labels. So I just wanted to make that clear from the get-go. I also want to say that I'd like this to be as interactive as possible. I know we have time at the end for discussion, but I'm going to be kind of soliciting information from you guys as we go through the presentation. So the first thing I want to do, even though I've sort of put these pictures up here, which may be a little bit leading, and I know that some of you are undergrads and probably aren't doing your own food shopping right at the moment, but I'm kind of curious just to get some information from you guys about how you interpret our food landscape. When you go shopping for food at the grocery store, how do you feel? What are some of the things that you think about? So I just want to start off by doing that, by having you guys just kind of throw out some words to describe what our food landscape looks like. Anybody? Overwhelming. What's that?
A jumble.
A jumble. Overwhelming.
Toxic.
What's that?
Toxic.
Toxic. Other things you feel when you go to the grocery store?
Superficial.
Superficial.
Finally, I can get some food.
Finally, what?
Finally, I can get some food.
Okay, so I'm not going to sort of go into any detail about any of those comments right at the moment, but hopefully we'll get to some of those in just a few minutes. I just wanted to kind of very quickly talk about how we got to this place. And this is a really one slide to basically give a history of agriculture leading up to where we are now in the U.S. And I give entire lectures on this, and you could spend an entire quarter talking about this, so this is just really in a nutshell. But one thing I find really interesting is that for the majority of U.S. history, for about 300 years, even before we were our own country, most people were involved with food production. So upwards of 90% of people were involved with producing their own food. And mostly this was subsistence farming, so providing just what you needed. So we didn't have that problem up until about 60 years ago, 70, 80 years ago, of really having all these choices. And the things that changed after World War II that kind of led us to this place of increased productivity and different choices that we have now were really just technological advances, just the machinery that we had available, the chemicals that we had available, transportation developments. So all of these things sort of led to a system where we're mass producing food, and also agricultural policies have led us to a place where we're really just producing a lot of commodity crops. So I'm sure you're probably not familiar with this, maybe some of you are, but only about 4 to 7% of the crops that we grow in the U.S. are fresh fruits and vegetables. The majority of what we grow, over 90% of what we grow today, are commodity crops like wheat and corn, which either go to feed animals or go to processed foods. Okay, so that was a very, very quick recap of how we got to this place. So, as you guys said, when we go in the grocery store, we have a ton of items there for us. We have a lot of choice. We have had high yields, and now we have a real abundance of cheap foods. And this is a kind of interesting graph here. We've had pretty much an exponential increase in the number of different food items available in the grocery store. And I have food items in quotation marks because it's kind of debatable whether or not a lot of those things that we have in the grocery store can really be qualified as food. Pretty interesting to note that we have an average of about 50,000 items in a grocery store. That's average. So some grocery stores have many, many more items. Some specialty stores will certainly have less. But 50,000 items, that's pretty mind-boggling in and of itself. That's about 5 times more than we had in 1975, which still 10,000 items seems like a lot to me. So, it's really interesting because for up to a point, people really thought that all of these choices were really liberating. It's really freeing to have all of these choices, right? But a lot of studies now are showing that actually these choices are more debilitating than they are liberating. There's a book out, The Paradox of Choice by Schwartz, Why More is Less, about just this topic, about how it's affecting our mental state basically in this, specifically in the United States, about all the choices that we have. There was a kind of an interesting study that was done that's kind of now a sort of capstone study that was done by a Stanford professor and a professor from Columbia University, and they used Draeger's Market in Menlo Park as where they set up their experiment. And basically one Saturday they set up a station where they had 24 different jams that people could taste, and then if they tasted they would get a coupon to buy. The following Saturday they only had 6 jams set up where they would also get the option to get a coupon to buy the jam if they tried it. Kind of interesting thing is that many more people stopped by the 24 option jam stand, but fewer people bought any jam, and less people were satisfied with their decision, with what they bought. So the people who bought, it kind of points out that people really feel like they want all of these choices, right? I mean, they were really attracted to all these choices, but in the end they had a harder time making a decision about what to buy, and then they weren't as satisfied with the decision that they made. So anyway, all this to say, another question that I have for you guys is, how do consumers make choices, and how do you guys specifically make choices? What are some criteria that you use when you choose a specific brand, or what are you looking for in food? So I just want to kind of have you guys throw some ideas out there right now for that.
Same as last time.
Same as last time. It's a jumble. What are some?
No. I always buy the same things.
Oh, okay. So you just buy what you know, basically. Cheapest. Okay. Cost.
Nutrition labels.
Okay. Nutrition labels.
The number of ingredients on the list.
Number of ingredients.
Well,
Organic.
Toxicity.
How do you determine that?
Well, I'm obsessed that nothing I eat comes from the country of China.
Uh-huh.
I'm so impressed with their toxicity and with what I think is their orientation to pressing upon me, that I really strive what possible ingredient of this could have come from China.
Mm-hmm. So if
non-China is my primary objective.
okay. Anyone else want to weigh in? Taste.
I enjoy Trader Joe's because they have less of each, so if you want to buy a certain type of drink or whatnot, there's usually like 1 or 4 options instead of a whole pile of
So they take away the choice so that it's
Right,
easier
yeah,
on
the
you.
choice.
Okay. So what we've discovered is that most people make choices based either on rational decisions or on emotional decisions. So cost is a really big factor for most people. They're going to often choose the cheaper. The ease, whatever's the easiest. Familiarity, so what you know. Appearance and packaging can sometimes bring up emotional responses, whether it be nostalgia or something that just makes you feel good. Your knowledge, whether that's a perceived knowledge where you read the nutrition label and feel like you know something about it, or knowledge that you get from some other source. Labels are really influencing how people make choices. And then this is kind of getting into the bulk of the talk here today, is people do make ethical choices when they're purchasing food. So a really important thing to note is that over the last 30 years, the cost of food in terms of the cost to the farm or the money going back to the farm has not changed very much at all. But the cost to the consumer has increased pretty significantly, and the bulk of that increase has to do with the marketing costs. So the people who are selling the food are spending a lot of money on marketing that food to you. So it's in their best interest to make sure it works. And we know that it does work. Packaging is really influential on how people perceive what they're buying. One really good example of this is wine. Actually, it's pretty well shown that people actually buy wine predominantly on what the label looks like and not so much about what they know about the wine itself. So it's in their best interest to make a nice bottle, right? And something that looks nice, even if their wine doesn't taste good. People are really influenced by these sort of nice and provocative images, but also buzzwords and things that make them feel good. So one other one that I wanted to point out is this one I'm sure you're probably familiar with. The California Milk Advisory Board is really, in the past couple years, really aggressively campaigning for people to buy California milk. California cows are happy cows, right? Well, in reality, and you see this picture of a cow, and people actually do want to do the right thing, and they feel good about purchasing something where they think that the animals are being treated well and that they have a good life. But in reality, most dairy cows in California are in CAFO systems, in confinement animal feeding operation systems, upwards of 20,000 cows per operation. So if they are out on pasture, they're in small confined paddocks. They're almost never out on a pasture like this on a hillside. So so that gets into the ethics of this whole conversation. So the main categories of concern that people have, health is number one. People are more concerned about their own well-being. How is this, whatever I'm buying, going to influence my health than some of these other categories? But again, we're not really going to be talking about that. I'm not a nutritionist, and I do know a few things about mislabeling in terms of the health implications, and we can maybe talk about that later. But we're going to focus on the two other things that people are interested in knowing about, and that's the environmental impact of their food and the animal welfare. It's pretty interesting to me to note that studies have shown that people are much more interested in animal welfare than they are in the social impacts of their food, meaning they don't really care how the farm labor is treated. They're more interested in how the animals are treated on the farm, which I think is a really interesting piece. With two notable exceptions, that is chocolate and coffee. We've all seen fair trade labels. I'm sure we've all seen fair trade labels for coffee and chocolate, and those have been very successful. But mostly people are not that concerned about fair trade labels for the rest of food that we purchase. Okay, so I'm sure you've probably all seen some of these labels on food. We're going to try and get into what some of these things mean. So, it's pretty interesting. My husband and I raise all of the meat that we consume and all of the eggs and all of the dairy and about 80% of our vegetables. But we still go grocery shopping. We still need to buy staple foods. And I just get really pissed off when I go to the grocery store and see all of these labels, because I'm very well informed about these things, but I think about the rest of the people out there who might not be so informed, and how the heck do you make a decision if you have concerns about these things? How do you make decisions, and how do you know what these things actually mean? So I'm going to start with a case study, which I'm sure how many people buy eggs at the grocery store? Okay, this one is really complicated and confusing to people, I believe. What's that?
The worst.
The worst,
I spend more time reading egg cartons than anything else in the store.
Yeah, well, I did it just recently for fun. I actually haven't bought eggs in 12 years. I've been raising chickens for the past 12 years, so I've never had to buy eggs, but it is really challenging when you look in the egg case at the store. And again, a lot of these labels have these real picturesque scenes of happy chickens out in the field. That's not the case for the most part. That's not how chickens live. So there are also lots of buzzwords around eggs, right? You see free range or free roaming, cage free, all natural, et cetera, farm fresh. So I just want to talk about each of these individually. But first, if you look at this picture up here, and then you look at that list of descriptors, there's only one word in that list that could absolutely not apply to this scene. So every single other one of those could potentially be this system. So which one does not apply? Pastured is the only one. Okay, so this could be a cage-free operation. In fact, it is a cage-free operation. It could be free-range. They could have all-natural diet. It could be farm-fresh. It could be vegetarian, organic, farm-raised. So let's just kind of weed through all of those terms. Cage-free, as some of you probably know, California passed Proposition 2 in 2008, which will take effect in 2015, which eliminated battery cages for the state of California. There's a handful of states that have already done it. So these are battery cages, basically these tiny cages that house one or more chickens. Chickens aren't really able to move in a natural way. They can't spread their wings out, etc. So cage-free literally just means they are not in those cages. There is no specification on any other part of the aspects of their being raised. So they can be raised in a situation like this, and that's certainly cage-free, but does it mean that it's good? There's actually been a lot of arguments, and I had a hard time with Proposition 2 because In a situation like this, it could actually be worse for the chickens than when they're in cages. Because there's so many chickens in such a cramped area, they actually do a lot of damage to each other. They can peck at each other. You have bloody chickens. You have chickens getting stomped on and killed. There's people that their job is to actually go through and pick up dead chickens all day. And often in situations like this, you end up having to use a lot of antibiotics because you have so many sores and things on the chicken. So it's probably a step up from the cages in terms of the animals being able to move and whatnot, but it's not necessarily the best thing in terms of the animal welfare. In fact, in a lot of systems like this, how many people have seen the movie Our Daily Bread? Anyone? Just a couple? There's a scene in that movie where you see the little chicks being passed from person to person, and then their head is kind of stuck into this little machine, and they're actually being debeaked. And that's so that they won't hurt each other in a system like this. So whether or not, I don't know which one is better of those. Free range, basically this could easily be a free range system. There are really no specifications in terms of how much room a chicken needs. The only thing about free range is that they need to have access to the outdoors for some amount of time every day. That could be 5 minutes. So there's no specifications on how much time, and also often these systems, the chickens are really too scared to go outside, so they never actually do go outside, and they're often only given basically a cement block to go walk out onto. So free range, I hope I'm not like killing everybody's, but this is the thing that's really bothersome to me, is that people really do feel like they're trying to make good decisions about animal welfare, but these are all really misleading. And so we'll talk about, the ethics of that. All natural, whenever you see the word natural on a food item, just totally disregard it. It really has no definition, and there's no regulations behind the word natural. Arsenic is a naturally occurring compound. It's found in most chicken feed. So all natural diet doesn't mean anything. Farm fresh, again, there's just no legal definition. There's no way to regulate it. Farm fresh eggs could be weeks old. It doesn't really have any merit. The word vegetarian started as a way to describe chickens who are not being fed other animal products. So often, unfortunately, animals are fed animal products, and sometimes, like in the case of chickens, they're being fed other chicken. So it was a way to designate that those animals were not being fed ground up chicken or other meats. But the problem with it is it's not regulated, number one. It's not really very well defined. But number two, chickens are omnivores. And so they actually shouldn't be fed a strictly vegetarian diet, but the meat part of their diet should come from insects. So really, chickens need to be out on pasture in order to be fulfilling their dietary needs. Organic is strictly regulated, but all it has to do with is that you're feeding those chickens organic feed and that you're not administering antibiotics or growth hormones. So it has nothing to do with how the animals are raised. This could easily be an organic system. Farm raised, again, means nothing. Pastured means that the animals have to have access to fresh grass. Doesn't specify how that happens, so they can be in confined areas with many other animals, but they do have to have access to fresh grass on a regular basis, so they will have to be moved around. They are outside. They do have access to insects and whatnot that they need for their diet. So I suppose pasture is probably the best in terms of the animal welfare. There is a label that's animal welfare approved, and they do have very strict regulations about how those animals are treated and stocking spaces and whatnot. So if your concern is mostly animal welfare, then you probably want to look for that label. So did I quash everybody's?
Do we have to assume that cage-free means that they've probably been debeaked?
Not necessarily. It's hard to know that. You could probably try to get information from the company itself, although they don't like to give that information out. But yeah, I don't know exactly percentages in terms of how many of those are debeaked. I know it's really common in Europe. I'm not sure how common it is in California.
And roaming?
Again, there's not really any sort of legal definition for that. It's kind of like free range. They don't really have there's no regulatory process for that, so they can use terms like this and really not have any consequences. And people who think they're doing the right thing are buying these products because of the way that they're the way that they're presented. So all that to say, there are very many false claims out there. We just looked at eggs, but there's lots and lots of situations where there's the misuse of terms like eco and sustainable and healthy and local and natural. Of course, there's tons of health claims that are not justified. Lowers your cholesterol, or are heart healthy, or doctor approved, or pediatrician recommended. All of these things, they really don't have any basis in anything, but they can be put on a label, and there really aren't any consequences right now for that. Something that really saddens me quite a bit is this use of the word local. There is no definition of it. I feel very strongly about supporting local farmers, but it's pretty rampant that restaurants especially will say we source local, we use local products, and in fact no one's asking them questions about that, and there's no way to really, unless you have a good relationship with them, unless you ask questions, then you're really not going to know. In fact, my brother-in-law was a chef at a restaurant in Vermont that was serving local lamb that was from New Zealand. I don't know about you, but I don't consider New Zealand very local to Vermont. He ended up leaving that restaurant partially for that reason. And then recently this breaks my heart, but there were studies, or an undercover kind of expose of a farmer's market in Southern California that was showing that a number of the vendors there were actually buying their produce from places like Costco and then selling it at a much marked up cost under the pretense that it was local and sustainably raised. So it's really challenging to figure out how to navigate this system. Yeah?
My dad's a beekeeper, and he knows some of the farmers. He said some of them will sell their produce to the supermarkets, and they'll take their junk produce to farmers markets as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of false claims out there. I just wanted to put out this list of claims that have either no legal definition or no third-party certifier, and it's not necessarily true that these claims aren't true for specific producers, but there's just no way to verify it unless you are able to go to the farm yourself, or unless you can talk to these people and ask the right questions. All of these things really have no legal definition and no way to certify it. Did you have a question?
Yeah, when companies or stores or restaurants say the produce is local within 30 miles or something,
Mm-hmm.
or is that a claim you can believe?
Probably, yeah. I mean, if they actually say how local it is, when you have to be a little bit concerned is when they just broadly use the term local, because there is really no defined local region. But if they specify that it's within a certain radius of that spot, then they're probably not lying. It's pretty easy to trace if you want to do the legwork, but it's difficult.
So for things like milk, we often have it hormone-free stamp. Is there any kind of hormone-free actual certification?
Organic. Organic is really the only one that you can 100% be safe with dairy in terms of hormone-free. So we can talk a little bit more about these things. I'm going to actually talk about milk in a minute. But so who regulates these labels? Right now, the USDA and the FDA both are involved with labeling and supposed enforcement of the labels. The USDA deals with meat, poultry, and eggs, and the FDA deals with everything else. The FDA, those nutrition labels that you find on the back of food, those came about in 1994, and every food item is supposed to have those according to the FDA. However, there is no regulations on the front of packaging. So all of that information, the necessary information that's according to the USDA and the FDA, has to come on the back of packages, and then you can put whatever the heck you want on the front of your packages. So in theory, it's illegal to make false claims or to use ambiguous language, but there's a lot of loopholes, and there's really no good way, quick and easy way to regulate this. So, there are a lot of consumer watchdog organizations that are trying to take up this fight because it has gotten a little bit out of hand, as I'm sure you've seen if you try and buy some of this stuff in the store. But right now, the whole regulatory process is just really, really slow. So, the other thing that I wanted, sort of the flip side of this that I wanted to bring up is, we see that there's sort of a massive problem of under-regulation on the claims that are on labels. But I think in some ways there's actually overregulation in terms of my choices of where my food comes from. So I wanted to specifically talk about small-scale meat producers and raw dairy, because these are two areas that are really so highly regulated that consumers actually don't have very much choice in the matter. So my husband and I live on a farm in Los Altos Hills called Hidden Villa, and he manages all the livestock. We sell at a farmer's market the meat, and thus we have to slaughter it at a USDA regulated slaughterhouse. As you can see from this map, this is just one. I could have done this for any type of meat: pork, chicken, lamb. This is for cattle, but this shows, this might not be totally clear to all of you back there, but it basically shows all the counties in the country that do not have adequate slaughterhouses for the number of producers that are actually trying to raise those the cattle. So it's pretty widespread. We just don't have the slaughterhouses available to us. So small scale producers have very limited options in terms of how they get that meat to you. In our case, my husband has to drive down to Paso Robles to get his meat slaughtered, and that slaughterhouse is awful. They always get our orders wrong. They charge an arm and a leg. They do a pretty poor job as far as we can tell, but that is our only option. So in order to sell that meat at the farmer's market or to restaurants or to retail places, we have to go through that avenue. There's really you cannot go to a farm and buy meat that they slaughter on the farm, according to the USDA. And same with raw dairy. We just don't have very many options for that. There's a lot of states that have outlawed raw dairy already. California's pretty much heading in that direction. There's only 2 raw dairies in the whole state of California. The argument is that it's a health risk. Well, in the past 10 years, about 2 people have died of raw dairy. I'm not saying that's something to, to discount, but I mean, the thing to note is that pasteurized dairy also has issues with contamination, and people get sick from that as well. My point is, if there's enough information out there, and I don't know how many of you have ever bought raw dairy, but it's about $10 a gallon. You're not going to accidentally buy raw dairy without thinking it through. So if you have the information there, and maybe they put a label on it that says the FDA does not, the FDA says there are risks associated with drinking this, then why can't consumers make that choice for themselves? So on one hand, we're getting all this misinformation. On the other hand, we just don't have certain choices that I think a lot of people really want to have. Along with the raw dairy, it's really interesting to me that we can't make those choices, but a lot of people are really concerned about genetically modified foods, but those are not labeled, and it doesn't seem that they will be anytime in the future. So we don't have that choice of deciding whether or not we want to buy, unless we only buy organic, then we don't have that choice. So it's interesting to me that on one hand they're making these decisions for us, and we can't make those decisions as consumers, and on the other hand they're not giving us very good information for the stuff that is out there. Okay, so are there labels that actually mean anything? There are plenty that do. Whether or not you understand what they mean, that's a different story. But all of these labels have third-party certification process. They do have a regulation process that they go through. We can talk more about what each of these means if you're interested in that, but yeah, so it's up to you to kind of understand what the labels mean, but these are labels that actually have real meaning. Are you taking a picture before I... There's a whole bunch of new labels that have just come out or are in the pipeline that are pretty interesting. There's a food miles label that kind of helps you understand carbon emissions associated with that food. There's this predator-friendly one that's mostly, this one's out now. This one is mostly for ranchers who are selling livestock products to assure that no coyotes or mountain lions or any predators have been injured in the process. There's a lot of ranchers that are gun happy, ready to kill the first coyote that comes near their livestock. So the predator friendly one just gives that information. So there's a whole bunch of them kind of in the pipeline or coming out right now. So something that we could talk about are more labels necessarily better. Well, I think the first order of business is to fix the system so that we actually know that labels mean something. But do we really need to have like 3,000 labels on the front of every package of food? I don't know. They do have these new applications for smartphones, which are pretty interesting and could be potentially a really useful tool, where you can scan the barcode and be able to I don't know how much of this is available right now, but it's definitely on its way if it's not available. But you can find out, about the carbon footprint. You can find out about food miles. You can find out about sustainability issues. You can find out about where it came from. So there's a whole bunch of information that you could get through your cell phone on the label. And so I'm just going to end with this, and then we can talk about whatever it is you guys want to, where you want to go with this. But just thinking about what if these labels actually did tell us the truth. I mean, if they actually had information on there that told you more about the product, what would that mean for us as consumers or them as, companies that are selling these things? And so what kind of responsibility do we feel like companies have to us? And beyond that, ethically, what kind of responsibility do the regulatory bodies have to us? Because right now it seems like they're not doing us a favor necessarily. And how much choice should we have? So I just want to kind of open it up now to the last 20 minutes of discussion.